It's Wednesday. It's 8:30 Central Time, the one true time zone. That means it's time for the Combat Press. First, I'm going to change the camera to myself because we are a professional organization using proper techniques. It's Wednesday. It's 8:30 p.m. Central Time in the one true time zone. That means it's time for the Combat Press Midweek Report. I'm your host, Eric Reinert. Tonight, I am drinking a Pabst Blue Ribbon Tallboy because it's Wisconsin, and I love it. I'm joined again, and hopefully as always, by my mainest man, contributing staff writer to CombatPress.com, styling Riley Kontek. Riley, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, man. I'm drinking water because I'm being responsible, and by that I mean I'm just too tired to drink beer right now.
Hey, you know, it's still the work week. Not all of us make the sort of irresponsible decisions that some of us make.
Oh, I usually do. That's the thing. That's why it's so rare right now.
Well, I will drink enough for the two of us tonight, I can assure you.
That's cool by me, man. I'm probably going to pass out after this. So
Tonight, before you do, we've got quite a bit to talk about.
Yep.
I want to talk about UFC 177 last weekend because I ordered it, and actually I'm pretty glad I did, so we'll get to that. Let's preview the Fight Night card, the UFC Fight Night card coming up this Friday from Ledyard, Connecticut. Of course, that's headlined by a middleweight match between Jacare Souza and Gegard Mousasi. I want to talk about the Invicta card, also coming up this weekend from Kansas City. That should be fun. I'm going to let my man Riley here cover a lot of that because he is Schaumburg, Illinois' resident expert on women's mixed martial arts, and probably in the greater Midwest, one of the more formidable minds on women's mixed martial arts. So I look forward to your commentary. Man. I look forward to your commentary there, Riley, very much.
We'll talk
about a little conflict business-wise in MMA coming up this Friday as the UFC and Bellator hold simultaneous events in the small state of Connecticut. So we'll touch on that. And we'll talk about a little bit more, which I'll get to at the very end of the program. So, like I said, before we do, I want to give a couple of shout-outs, of course. We want to thank Rob Tatum, Magic Rob Tatum, as I like to call him, and Hollywood Brian Henderson, editors at CombatPress.com for letting us do this every Wednesday. Thanks a lot, guys. You should check out their preview of Ultimate Fight Night 50 coming up this Friday. Check that out on CombatPress.com, as well as all of the wonderful content that you can find at CombatPress.com. Riley, let's get started.
I'm down.
UFC 177. You said you probably took it in at a bar. I decided kind of cringingly because the card shifted even more than we thought it would in the time between we did the show and the fight somehow, and almost because of all that chaos is why I decided to spring for it. And the card is pretty good. Folks can check out a little almost recap, but also analysis of kind of the things people go through when deciding whether or not a card was worth it to purchase tomorrow on CombatPress.com. But for now, I'll just say I'm really glad I made that purchase. It was the expectations were low, but the outcome was very exciting. So, Riley, who do you think performed most memorably at UFC 177?
I'm gonna have to go with probably Betchka Heda. I'm not to be the guy that jumps on the women's bandwagon, but I was the one that was really doubting her abilities. If you remember last week, I said she hasn't beaten anybody in convincing fashion,
right.
and she did on Saturday. She beat up Shayna Baszler, who's a longtime veteran of the sport, and not only did she beat her, she put her down. It was like a 25-strike combination that finished her. So it was probably more than that, actually. So I was very, very impressed with her. And Carlos Diego Ferreira, like I said, he's a guy to look out for. He was one of my top prospects coming into the UFC. And I thought he really, really impressed as well.
Which of the fighters are you looking forward to seeing fight next the most?
I would probably say Carlos Diego Ferreira. Like I just mentioned, I know Nijim's been known to keep his hands down a little bit and get caught, but Ferreira's not a guy known for his striking. He's a guy known for his jiu-jitsu, and he clipped Nijim on multiple occasions in that fight. Not to say he didn't get caught himself, but he knocked out a guy that a lot of people thought had the standing advantage. So I'm really excited to see where he goes next.
Yeah, I have to give a couple of shout-outs to some people from UFC 177. I agree that Betcha Koheda definitely put on one of the best performances of the evening. It was the sort of fight that she needed. It was the sort of victory that she needed because, obviously she had strung together a number of decisions. And I picked Shayna Baszler to emerge victorious on Saturday night, and I was incorrect. And I was incorrect by a lot. When that thing turned into what was basically a hockey fight, Betcha Koheda proved that she is one of the better strikers in the women's bantamweight division. Perhaps Shayna Baszler, her place among the UFC women's bantamweight fighters could be in question, particularly after sort of the one-sided defeat that she suffered at the hands of Koheda. I think she gets one more fight in the UFC, and she certainly put on an admirable performance. But that being said, Betcha Koheda really just put it to her. I think she probably needs one more fight before she would be considered for a bantamweight title shot, but who knows? In the thin division that is the women's bantamweight one, and the fact that Ronda Rousey has defeated most of the women between Koheda and herself in the rankings, I think we could see Koheda in a title fight sooner rather than later. The other person I want to give a shout-out to is Joe Soto. Originally, he was supposed to appear on the preliminary card, but at pretty much the very last minute, almost right before weigh-ins, it was revealed that Renan Barão, of course, was withdrawing from the fight due to issues weighing in, and Soto was offered the fight, and he stepped up and he performed about as well as anybody could have expected him to. One would think that a guy, Soto's got an impressive resume, but still against a guy like T.J. Dillashaw, who is one of the better fighters pound for pound in the world, I think. And he's proven that. Well, maybe that's a little bit overstepping, but he's certainly one of the best bantamweights to ever fight in the UFC, obviously as the reigning champion. So for him to do what he did to Renan Barão and then still have to go 4 rounds with Joe Soto, sure, T.J. Dillashaw probably won all of those rounds and did end up finishing Joe Soto in the 4th round. But nevertheless, Joe Soto, I think, did a lot better than people thought he would. And put on a worthy performance that I think is going to land him on the main card of some UFC event in the future. I think he springboards from obviously unranked to probably somewhere in the top 15, even given his loss to T.J. Dillashaw because of the competitive nature of the fight. Again, I acknowledge that T.J. Dillashaw, won all the rounds and then knocked him out, but it certainly, I don't think, would be considered a one-sided decision, particularly given how short of a time span they had to prepare for one another. So I give all the props in the world to Joe Soto, and I wish him nothing but the best for his future in the UFC. I once again, Riley, I also agree with you. The fighter I'm most excited to see again is Diego Ferreira. Obviously, he's very adept on the mat, but what he did to Ramsey Nijem, and really putting him down, it wasn't an unconvincing knockout. Like, he really clipped him.
Right.
And so he's obviously rounding out his skill set, and I really look forward to seeing what he has next coming up for him. So, overall, I'm pretty happy with the purchase. We've had some really terrible cards at times in the UFC. UFC 174 comes to mind, but that was again one that people had pretty low expectations for. The worst stuff is when you have really high expectations for a card because it looks really good and then it doesn't end up delivering. And I think this is kind of the opposite of that, where people's expectations were really low, and I think the card really over-delivered in terms of the quality of the fight. So.
Well, I always say that it's always the cards that are not expecting a lot are the ones that do the best. I mean, I can specifically remember the Lieben versus Munoz card in England. Everyone was bitching about it. They were like, this is a terrible card. The English people are getting screwed. That was one of the better fight nights in recent memory in the last 2 years that happened. And I know Lieben got busted in the main event afterwards for I think it was banned substances. But on the whole, that card was awesome, and everyone was complaining about how awful it was going to be. So it's always the ones that have low expectations, and those are the ones that deliver for the most part. Unlike, like you said, UFC 174, that one, was crap, and I'm happy I missed that one, by the way.
I bought it because the Demetrius Johnson factor, as I like to call it. I'll buy any fight that he's in, and frankly, a night out I figured was going to cost me more probably, the same if not more as UFC 177. So
yeah,
that's
usually in police fines. Yeah, you're right. My nights out are usually a little more expensive than staying in.
I tend not to have those sorts of problems, but nights out here in Madison, Wisconsin, particularly when you've got a woman on your arm, can get a little pricey at times.
Oh, okay. I usually have two.
Well, apparently you're going to the right places and spending the right amounts of money.
Oh, if only, if only.
I feel sorry for those ladies.
Me too, if that was actually a real thing.
UFC Fight Night 50, Jacare versus Mousasi comes to us this Friday night. Kind of a rare Friday card for the UFC, but certainly not unwelcome. Comes to us from Ledyard, Connecticut. We'll talk about perhaps why it's on a Friday instead of a Saturday in a little while. And I alluded to that a little bit before. But, Riley, let's break down the main card fights here. First, we've got 5th-ranked flyweight John Moraga taking on Justin Scoggins. I think this is a great matchup for Justin Scoggins, and it's a really bad matchup for John Moraga, because if Justin Scoggins wins, hey, he beat 5th-ranked John Moraga. But if John Moraga wins, hey, he beat unranked prospect Justin Scoggins. And if Moraga loses to Scoggins, obviously that's going to do a lot of harm to his current position in the flyweight rankings. So, Riley, your thoughts on this first opening contest?
Well, first off, I really, really like John Moraga. I think he's a very well-rounded guy. And if you look at his losses, his only losses in the UFC are for the title against Johnson and against John Dodson, who I think is the number one contender. I think he's the number one contender in my opinion. Scoggins, I think, is a little bit overrated. I think guys watched his performances, his first 2 wins, and they were really, really putting him on a pedestal. Obviously, his win over Richie Vass was really, really, really impressive. But let's remember, Richie Vass is probably in the bottom 5 in terms of flyweights in the UFC. So that should have been expected, although I picked against him. I didn't know much about Justin Scoggins at that point. His second win was over Will Campuzano, who's, I think, UFC records like 1-4 or 1-5 or something like that. So, I mean, really, I think people gave him an overvalue. So in this matchup, I do like Moraga. I think that he has good enough stand-up to not only close the distance but do some damage. Scoggins is a durable guy, but I think that his gas tank got checked in his last fight when he fought Dustin Ortiz. I think Dustin wore him down, and he lost his gas tank there. And I think that Moraga is going to do the same thing. And Moraga is a strong 125er. He'll put him against the cage, and he'll put him on his back, and then he'll wear him out, and he'll wear him out. So I have Moraga taking this one by decision.
I agree with you up until the actual prediction. I think that this one's definitely going to stay on their feet. Neither of these guys have particularly shown a tendency for submission grappling. Scoggins himself has 6 wins by knockout or technical knockout, and really his only loss in his career comes to, like you said, Dustin Ortiz, and that was by split decision. So, that's and anytime there's a split decision, there could be some potential conflict there. I'm not saying that he deserves to be undefeated, but he's had a decent career for himself, as has John Moraga. Obviously, he had the title shot already in the flyweight division, and as you mentioned, his only losses have been to really elite guys in the division. So this is definitely more of a proving ground type of fight for Justin Scoggins, because he's obviously being put up against a literal top 5 flyweight in the hopes that perhaps another guy can be injected into the flyweight title picture that hasn't already been defeated either by Demetrius Johnson himself or by somebody immediately below him. I've actually got Scoggins here. I just think because of all the things that I mentioned, the opportunity he's being afforded here, I think that he is going to get the better of what will probably be a bloody stand-up battle. I don't expect either guy to finish this, despite both of these guys kind of, frankly, rather impressive finishing records for flyweights. But especially Scoggins, you don't tend to see a lot of flyweights finishing most of their fights by knockout or technical knockout. And so I predict this one's going to be bloody, but I do think it's going to go for the full 3 rounds. But I do think Scoggins is going to win. And I do think this is a possible fight of the night contender. So it's
I agree with that.
Great one to open up Friday's main card.
Definitely,
Next.
And I think, and before you go on, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think Dustin Ortiz out-wrestled Justin Scoggins, and I really, really think that Dustin Ortiz's wrestling is not as good as John Moraga's. That's why I think Moraga's going to be able to out-wrestle him and out-clinch him. So that's why I went with that pick. Remember,
All right.
Moraga's an Arizona State wrestling alumni, so...
Well, they've only had Cain Velasquez and Ryan Bader and Aaron Sims. Just whatever.
Couple decent wrestlers.
Yeah, right. Next, we've got what I think is kind of quietly one of the better fights of the year. We've got Nick Lentz, 8th ranked featherweight, versus Charles Oliveira, 14th ranked. Oliveira, frankly, Riley, looked like a wrecking machine when he first got into the UFC. He was undefeated. He had 14 wins, 13 by stoppage. And then he ran into Jim Miller and Donald Cerrone. And, that kind of brought him down to earth. Of course, since that point, he's dropped to featherweight, where he's 4-2. With the 2 losses being to second-ranked Cub Swanson, 3rd-ranked and former lightweight champion Frank Edgar. So certainly not losses to be ashamed of. He does have 7 post-fight awards in his UFC career, which is very impressive. So anytime you see him on the bill, expect some explosive action. He's obviously taking on Nick Lentz, who I think, again, he's taking on Nick Lentz. Lentz, I think, has quietly established himself as a contender. At 145, he's 9-3-1 with the no contest against Oliveira in the UFC. And he, unlike many other fighters, he went the distance with Chad Mendes after Mendes had technically knocked out, I think, his last 4 guys. So both of these guys, I think, have a very impressive careers ahead of him. Oliveira is only 24 years old. Yep. I can't even, he's got such an upside. And because of that, this one's kind of tough to call, but I'm predicting that Oliveira is going to take this one by decision. And just like the first fight, I think this has enormous fight of the night potential, particularly because of the action that Oliveira brings to each of his fights. Riley.
Yeah, I don't see this going any different than the first fight. Obviously, the first fight was a no contest. But if you remember the first fight, Oliveira absolutely dominated Nick Lentz. It wasn't even a close fight. And honestly, the no contest was garbage because the final blow that caused the no contest, it didn't matter. Lentz was already done. So, I think Oliveira is a better stand-up fighter. I don't think Lentz looked necessarily great against Chad Mendes. He might have gone the distance with him, but Mendes blew his gas tank early. So, it was a terrible performance by Mendes. So I'm going to go with Oliveira, and I think he finishes him in the second round.
Right. Next, we've got very exciting. Before we get to the next fight, one of the reasons that I had such little problem buying UFC 177, sure, I cringed a little bit when I was like, yeah, okay, I'll buy it. But one of the reasons that I was okay with it because this card on Friday night is pay-per-view worthy, frankly, especially the top 3 fights. Even these 3 fights that we've talked about would have been probably more worthy pay-per-view undercard matches than what we saw at UFC 177. So for all intents and purposes, I'm pretending that I paid about $20 for UFC 177, and I'm paying $35 to watch this card on Friday night because that's going to make me feel better about the whole situation. Yeah. Particularly because the third fight on the card, we've got lightweights Joe Lozon, Michael Chiesa taking each other probably, or perhaps to the distance, perhaps not. Lozon has been fighting in the UFC since 2006. He's done well against kind of your average guys, but has had trouble with the upper echelon guys. Chiesa, meanwhile, has only lost once in his professional career, and that was to George Masvidal. Certainly looked impressive on the mat, as has, of course, Joe Lozon throughout his UFC career. So in this battle of fairly well-known, or pretty renowned and proven grapplers, who's going to have the edge? Riley.
Up until about 2 hours ago, I thought Michael Chiesa has this one in the bag. I think his wrestling and his counter submission game are good enough.
Did I miss a piece of news?
I'm going to get there right about now. Sorry. I thought everything he has on the feet, it's somewhat competitive. I think Lozon has a boxing advantage, but I think Chiesa's wrestling and counter submissions are good. But one of Chiesa's buddies from back home, he just tweeted about an hour or 2 ago, just died today. So I don't know how that's going to affect him in the cage, whether it's going to motivate him more, if he's going to have his mind in other places. So knowing what he did on The Ultimate Fighter 15, the live season, when his father had passed away early in the competition, I think that he's mentally strong enough to put that behind him. I'm not sure, but it seemed like it motivated him pretty well. So I'm going to stick with my prediction. I think Michael Chiesa is going to outwork him out in the clinch. He's going to outwork him from top position. He's going to avoid any type of crazy submission that Lozon has for him, and it's going to run him an emotional decision. I'm not 100% sure about that now as I was earlier, but that's what I'm going to go with for right now.
You know, Riley, I'm going to agree with you here. I think this is a great test for Chiesa, who had, similar success like Joe Lozon against kind of middle of the pack guys, but then faltered, like I said, against Masvidal. I don't know that Joe Lozon is a member of the elite lightweight group anymore. He's
No.
had kind of, on and off success, and I think what I worry about Joe Lozon, and viewers, anybody who's viewing this, forgive the train noise coming past my apartment here. We live in the middle of a city here. But Joe Lozon, his time is kind of running out, I think, in the UFC, and I mean that in the same way that it ran out for John Fitch, ran out for Yushin Okami. I'm not sure what Joe Lozon is being paid these days, but the fact that he's been in the UFC for 8 years, he's probably somewhere in the middle of the pay scale, and it's kind of put up or shut up time for him. I think if he's not able to prove that he is worth the money that the UFC is paying him by eventually truly advancing his career into that elite level of the lightweight division, I think that he runs the risk of the UFC cutting him. Kind of surprisingly, in the same way that they released, like I said, Yushin Okami, like they released John Fitch. Michael Chiesa, like I said, he's got a lot to prove, and I think Joe Lozon, despite his kind of so-so record in the UFC, is a well-known enough name that if Chiesa is able to defeat him, that will, inevitably boost his own cachet in the UFC's lightweight division, and he will probably be put up against a top 15 guy in his next fight. And Riley, I agree with you. I think that despite the unfortunate news that you have just broken to me and perhaps some of our viewers here tonight, Chiesa is going to pull this one out by decision. He's definitely a guy who, as you mentioned, we can't really get into the head of another person, but he has proven that he can fight through the sorts of difficult emotional states or situations that people can go through, because your father dying is kind of one of the worst things that can happen to a person, particularly if it's unexpected. And so, for Michael Chiesa to not only perform, at a professional level on The Ultimate Fighter, but succeed in the manner that he did, I think shows a lot about his mental strength, as you mentioned. And so I think he's going to take this one by decision. Next, we get into the kind of the top portion of the card. We're going to talk about a couple of heavyweight fights, and I'm always excited to watch the big guys fight. I think we've mostly come past an era where we're seeing guys who have no gas tanks slugging it out for 2 minutes, and then that's that. We've got Matt Mitrione in our first fight, who's a former NFL athlete, so obviously kind of on that elite level, versus Derek Lewis. Mitrione has done all right, kind of like Joe Lozon. He's done all right against sort of your average guys, but faltered against guys kind of approaching the top 10, top 15. Lewis hasn't lost since 2011, and he's got 7 knockout or TKO wins and a no contest. He has not been out of the first round in either of his 2 UFC fights, and I don't expect this one is going to last very long, frankly. I like Lewis to prove that he belongs in the UFC division here. I think he's going to knock Mitrione out. Actually, no, take that back. I think he's going to win by TKO. I don't know when, but it's definitely not going to be in the 3rd round. So first or second round TKO win for Derek Lewis in impressive fashion on Friday night over Matt Mitrione.
I really like Derek Lewis. I had him a few years ago on my Bleacher Report top 5 prospects at the heavyweight division. But the thing is, a lot of people are counting out Mitrione. He's fought good wrestlers before, he's fought good strikers before, and he's hung in the pocket with them. Obviously he had that unfortunate knockout to Roy Nelson, but that was on short notice. Lewis is a power guy. He's athletic, but there's not many heavyweights that are as quick as Matt Mitrione on their feet. He's got fantastic footwork. He moves like a lightweight. We forget about this because he's taken a step up, and he hasn't exactly performed like we thought he would. But the guy still has quick hands. He's a very good boxer. Because of his NFL defensive line, he's very strong. He's good at fending off takedowns for the most part. Lewis, he's a lot of his are ground and pound wins. He can knock guys out on the feet. But I think Mitrione is too quick and too athletic for him, and I think he's going to stick and move. And you said you think it's not going to last very long. I think you're going to see 15 minutes of Mitrione putting on a technical striking clinic. And he trains with the Black Zillions a lot. So he's training with a lot of guys like Anthony Johnson who can mimic a Derek Lewis-type style.
True. Well, either way, I think this should be a fairly exciting contest. I'm looking forward to it.
Especially because there's animosity, because Lewis called him out, and Mitrione didn't really appreciate that. So it should be interesting.
Yeah, Matt Mitrione is not a guy who I think would take that stuff kind of lightly, just in what we've seen from Matt Mitrione. Yeah. So, the stare down at the weigh-in should be interesting, and hopefully the subsequent fight actually lives up to what we think it might be. The co-main event of Friday sees former heavyweight / Pride middleweight standout, who's had a long career, 7th-ranked heavyweight Alistair Overeem, taking on Ben Rothwell in a battle of testosterone replacement therapy users, reputedly.
Yep.
When Overeem debuted in the UFC by smashing the crap out of Brock Lesnar and sending him into retirement pretty much, he looked like he was going to have a lock for the title reign, but then he had those knockout losses to Bigfoot Silva and to Travis Brown, which really derailed that stuff. His last win was a decision over Frank Mir. So, Riley, let me ask you this. Is this Alistair Overeem's last opportunity to prove that he belongs in the elite heavyweight conversation in the UFC?
Probably not. I think he's going to get all the chances in the world to succeed in the main event picture because he is a draw. A lot of people know who he is. He's a former K1 world champion. As an MMA fighter, he wasn't even a full-time kickboxer. A lot of people know who he is. So as long as he is able to win fights, every so often, he's going to be sticking around the picture. Now that he's off the juice, as everyone says, I think that
we'll see.
He has lost a bit. Yeah, exactly. Wait for till after the fight, but his Frank Mir fight wasn't especially impressive. I mean, I thought he was going to knock Frank Mir out pretty quickly because Mir has some mileage on him, and I thought that Overeem was going to be able to touch his chin, but it was kind of a lackluster performance in this matchup. And a lot of people think that this is a gimme fight. It really is not, because Overeem has shown that his chin is not exactly concrete. Ben Rothwell is a good kickboxer, maybe not as good as a kickboxer, but he hits hard. If he hits you on the chin, he is going to knock you out. Okay, but I'm obviously going to take Overeem here. I do trust his technical skills more. I think that working with Greg Jackson as a strategist is definitely going to help him. It can't hurt him really, because a lot of times he goes in there just to knock people's heads off. Now he's going to go in there with a plan. So I do think that Overeem wins this fight. I think he's going to pace himself, and I think if he does get a finish, it'll be late in the fight. Otherwise, I think he will run a decision over Rothwell.
I'll get to my analysis of this fight in a second, but let me ask you a follow-up question. Given the fact that Overeem has gone 1-2 in the UFC since his fight with Lesnar, and the fact that that win was, like you said, not an especially impressive one over Frank Mir, what does that say more about Alistair Overeem, or does that say more about Brock Lesnar because Alistair Overeem so thoroughly dominated Lesnar in their fight?
Well, there's a lot of factors in that because Overeem still hadn't tested positive for any performance enhancers. It was actually after the Lesnar fight in the lead-up to the Dos Santos title fight that he got busted for the first time. So he could have been on juice there. You add in the fact that Lesnar had diverticulitis twice. He shouldn't have even been fighting ever again. And I just don't think I just don't think that it doesn't really say much about Lesnar. Remember, Lesnar is a guy that came into this sport and 3 or 4 fights into it was a UFC champion. Okay, then he had diverticulitis, and all of a sudden he just wasn't the same guy. He was still a great athlete, but he just wasn't the same fighter. And I still think Overeem is a very compatible heavyweight. And seeing that Velasquez has cleaned out most of the division already, if Overeem gets a win here, he could be the top contender after the Verdum fight. So, especially given the lack of depth at the top of the division.
Who is a better hype man for Brock Lesnar, Paul Heyman or Dana White?
Oh, Paul Heyman, no doubt. Guy could sell. Oh, actually, you know what I could say? He could sell anything, but he didn't sell Curtis Axel too well.
We may get to more of that in a little while. Oh, spoiler! Rothwell has alternated wins and losses since coming to the UFC in 2009. He most recently won over Brandon Vera, but then got suspended because of, like I said, the elevated levels of testosterone. That fight took place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Just a side note. I think the most telling stat for this fight, for me, is that Rothwell went the distance with Mark Hunt, and Overeem has 2 recent knockouts. You said yourself that Ben Rothwell is a hell of a powerful striker, and I think that the knockout losses against Bigfoot Silva and against Travis Brown really kind of worry me a little bit when it comes to Alistair Overeem. He is, I think, the favored fighter here, but Riley, I'm going to disagree with you, and perhaps there's a little homerism in effect here, but I'm going with the Wisconsin boy, Ben Rothwell, by TKO in the co-main event.
Biased much?
The middleweight main event of Ultimate Fight Night 50, the eponymous fight, if you will, Jacare Souza versus Gegard Mousasi. Perhaps the hardest fight on the card to predict, and that's always good for a main event. I mean, and perhaps you disagree, and we'll see in just a few seconds here. But you know, Jacare, this is obviously a rematch of the fight that Mousasi won, but he won it by upkick, so kind of a freak, you know, not the most convincing way to win a fight. Meanwhile, Jacare has won 6 straight since 2011 when he lost to Luke Rockhold. Excuse me, and Mousasi's only recent loss is to Lyoto Machida, who's kind of one of those guys who, you know, if you were to put together a list of the top 10 UFC fighters of all time, Machida would absolutely be in consideration there. I think Jacare is pretty much guaranteed a title shot if he wins, especially if Chris Weidman is able to defeat Vitor Belfort, if that fight happens. Speaking of TRT, performance-enhancing drugs, Mousasi probably needs one more win after a hypothetical win over Jacare Souza before he's going to get a title shot. I think the one thing that concerns me here, really the only thing, is Jacare's age, and that's, you know, he's 34 years old. It's not past his prime, but it's not, you know, he's not a young buck anymore. Meanwhile, Gegard Mousasi's 29, and he's by far in the prime of his athletic career. Jacare has never been submitted, and Mousasi's never been knocked out. I think that's a pretty interesting statistic, noteworthy statistic going into this fight. Mousasi, I think, has the better all-around game, but Jacare is lethal on the mat, as he demonstrated, you know, early in his career, and as he's demonstrated most recently. Brian Henderson and Magic Rob Tatum did an excellent job in their toe-to-toe analysis of this fight, particularly in pointing out that Jacare Souza has certainly improved his striking game since the earlier portion of his career. I think that, combined with his absolute elite levels of grappling, give him the slight advantage over Mousasi here, and I'm predicting him to win by submission en route to a title fight eventually against whoever's holding the belt after Chris Weidman fights Vitor Belfort.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on Jacare there. Jacare got Mousasi down multiple times in their first fight, and like you said, he got hit with an upkick. So Jacare's striking has improved more than Gegard Mousasi's takedown defense. Yes. So I think that the striking is going to definitely help a guy like Jacare, because I think he actually has more power than Mousasi. He's just not nearly as technical. Mousasi's a fantastic boxer. Yeah. And he's added some kicks too. So I think, you know, but you know, on his back, I think Mousasi is incredibly underrated on the ground. I think he can hang with top guys on the ground. And I think Jacare, he's going to secure top position and make him uncomfortable for 5 rounds, and I think it'll go to a decision. I know I'm pretty decision heavy on this card, but it's just the matchups are very, very strong. So I'm going to take Jacare.
How do you think Jacare would favor, or how do you think he would perform hypothetically against Chris Weidman?
He would give him a run, but I don't think he would win. I think that if you wanted to put Weidman on his back, it wouldn't happen. Weidman's wrestling is light years ahead of Jacare's. On the feet, he has power, but Weidman has become a guy that's great with his footwork, great with his head movement, great with his hands, can move, is always on his bicycle. He's just a complete package. That's why he's the UFC champion. That's why he's beat Anderson Silva twice, you know, say the leg break thing, but he cleanly beat him in the first fight. So, you know, I see Vitor having a puncher's chance, but I think Weidman's going to beat Vitor. I don't see too many guys in the middleweight division beating Weidman at this point. So that's, you know, not even just Jacare, it's a lot of guys.
What does Chris Weidman have to do? And I know we're kind of getting on some tangents here, but yeah, why not? What does Chris Weidman have to do to kind of get into the Ronda Rousey, John Jones level of superstardom in the UFC? Because he's obviously very talented, But he kind of seems to be a hidden superstar, despite the fact that he's defeated Anderson Silva twice.
Keep winning and be humble. It worked for George St. Pierre, and it could work for him too. And I think he's a more exciting version of George St. Pierre, to be honest with you. So if he just keeps winning and doing his thing, I mean, he's already marketable as beating Anderson Silva twice. That no one can say that. That's all they have to do to market him. Say this guy beat the best fighter of all time twice.
Yeah.
So that's all they have to do, and people will tune in. And if they market him correctly, you get him on ESPN. He's making his media rounds. People will buy into him. I've bought into him.
I love the comparison that he's a more exciting version of GSP. I've never thought about that before, but that's really astute. That is really, really astute, because I mean he's obviously got the similar wrestling caliber, but you think Chris Weidman and you really think potential for finishing at any time and really in any place.
Right.
And I think people used to think that about George St. Pierre, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case anymore.
No.
Let's move on. I think UFC Fight Night on Friday. Like I said, I'm going to pretend I'm paying $35 for it because it's certainly an incredible, I would say, pay-per-view worthy card. With a title fight perhaps as an additional headliner. Toss a title fight on here, and I think that you could put this on any pay-per-view broadcast. So I'm going to pretend that I'm paying for this one instead of UFC 177. But I'm super looking forward to this one. It's a great Friday night. Let's jump topics here, just because I think that this probably segues a little better. The reason probably that the UFC is having this event on a Friday instead of on their traditional Saturday or Wednesday is because Bellator is also having an event in Connecticut, in Uncasville, which is about 10 miles away from Ledyard, where the UFC is having their event. The thing that I don't think a lot of people are talking about here is how Connecticut is, as a kind of one of the tri-state states, kind of, it's a short train ride away from New York City. Right? So Connecticut is, along with New Jersey, basically a de facto New York show. Mm-hmm. So for the UFC to come in and kind of usurp Bellator, because obviously the lineup they're putting together here is, Bellator's lineup, it's good for a Bellator lineup, but it's nothing like what we're seeing here in this pay-per-view quality stuff that the UFC is bringing us on Friday night. So let me ask you this, Riley. What is the best that Bellator can expect for this, both in terms of live attendance and television ratings? Yeah, that's my question.
Their television ratings aren't going to be as high as they normally are, I think. If there's people like me who are going to have two TVs in the same room going, hooked up to the cable, then they might get some. I'm going to literally have two TVs going. There's going to be Fox Sports one's over here, and Bellator's going to be over here, and then I'm going to be writing for, not to plug myself here, but BleacherReport.com. I'm doing some recaps and stuff.
Plug away, Riley. Plug away.
This is my platform to reach all 10 people that don't watch the show.
That's right.
Maybe
We're
down the line.
talking to you 10.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
Love you.
Yeah, but they'll do okay ratings. I don't think it's going to break any of their records. Although I think that their top fight is awesome. I think yes. I'm a huge Pat Curran fan. I love watching Patricio Faye fight. Other than that, the rest of their card doesn't really interest me. I mean, Bobby Lashley, it's like he's an attraction, but he's not really a guy that you're expecting to be, doing major things in the sport, especially because he's a part-time wrestler too.
Scott Coker.
I mean, King Mo's yeah. Well, yeah, that's the connection there, but he fights for TNA, or wrestles for TNA, so you're not going to see him too often. The LeVar Johnson-Chet Congo fight will be fun, but it's, I would rather watch Rothwell versus Overeem. And then you got, what's the other one? King Mo versus his third late replacement on like 1 week's notice, Dustin Jacoby. Nothing to take away from him, but honestly, I think they've given King Mo more chances than anybody in that organization to succeed, and he just hasn't done it. I think he's one of I said this, and I think it was Rob Tatum had a Twitter back and forth with me. I said, mark my words, King Mo is the most overrated fighter in MMA history. And he didn't agree with me, but that's still my opinion. He has a huge name and some marketability, but who is he beaten? I know he was a former Strikeforce champ. He grinded out Gayhard Mousasi, but who has he beaten? Right? And then he's one of the main pieces for Bellator. I'm not into that.
I think I could argue two names that are more overrated, and they're kind of obvious. Well, one's obvious: Kimbo Slice.
Oh, come on. No one expected Kimbo to be that good. Come on.
That good?
He's a street fighter.
I don't think, maybe this is an unpopular take. I don't care. I don't think Gina Carano's that good.
Oh, my God. You know nothing of women's history. Damn you.
Women's history? Oh, man.
Women's MMA history, dude, she beat everybody. She lost to Cyborg, and all of a sudden she's overrated. Cyborg's
I watched the first Elite XC fight on Showtime, all right, because of Crazy Horse versus KJ Noons. I wanted to see that stuff. That was pretty much when I first started getting into MMA because I was a college student at the time. I didn't have the money for UFC pay-per-view.
Crazy Horse.
Charles Crazy Horse Bennett beat the crap out of KJ Noons in
Crazy
that
Horse.
fight. And that was the first time I ever saw women's MMA. And by the way, when I saw that fight, I was like, this is as exciting as men's MMA. I don't know why this hasn't caught on before. I just think that I'm not saying that Gina Carano's not a bad fighter. I think that the level of the level of fame that she has achieved has more to do with her initial, her being the first one, as opposed to her being like some elite level fighter. I think if you put her against Ronda Rousey, even in Carano's prime, even in her best trained prime, I think Rousey takes her to school.
Well, I mean, I agree with that, but it's Ronda Rousey. And by the way, can we get a moment of silence for Crazy Horse? Guy's the best. All right, that's good. He doesn't deserve that much time.
Moment of silence. Did he die?
No, I just where is he? I think he disappeared.
Oh.
I think he's in jail, actually.
Maybe we can get him on the show.
If he has a computer.
I think that unfortunately this is the UFC big brothering the shit out of Bellator. Forgive my language. They're basically being like, oh yeah, you had your little pay-per-view, yeah, Scott Coker, that's cool, yeah. Hey, we're gonna come into the same tiny state that you're having your thing in because Connecticut is not big, and we're gonna put on such a great card that nobody's gonna come to your shit. And that's pretty much what's gonna happen on Friday night. I'm not saying they're gonna put Bellator out of business, but this is gonna prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the UFC truly has no competition.
As if they needed to prove that either.
Right. We'll see what if any impact that has on labor, but that's not a topic we want to talk about right now. What we do want to talk about is Invicta coming to us on UFC Fight Pass from Kansas City. Their 8th event, headlined with an atomweight championship fight by the karate hottie Michelle Waterson, who I saw and really, really wanted to succeed hardcore on Ninja Warrior. Unfortunately, she did not do too well. She is defending her atomweight championship against Yasuo Tamada. First, Riley, let me ask you this. When is the last time you weighed 105 pounds?
Oh, geez. Elementary school, probably. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm certainly I'm pretty much double that at this point, and it is not muscle.
You're 210 pounds? You got me beat.
No, not quite. I'm about 190. Ding,
right.
Dan Patrick.
Well, then I win. But I'm also probably way taller than you, so.
How tall are you?
I'm 6'4.5".
Yes, you are quite a bit taller than me. I am 5'10".
Well, there you go.
The karate hottie Michelle Waterson, obviously no MMA newcomer. She's been fighting since 2007 and really only lost once since 2008. I think the karate hottie is kind of a funny nickname for her because as I was looking at her statistics, she's actually won way more by submission than by strikes. Yep. Tamada's making her Invicta debut. She hasn't fought in more than a year, so she's certainly got a tough test ahead of her in Michelle Waterson, but she's never been finished. So I think that's probably fairly significant. I don't know how much power a person can pack only weighing 105 pounds, but shit, if you're fighting other people at 105 pounds, I guess anything's possible. That being said, I'm taking Michelle Waterson by decision. Riley, what I'd like to hear from you, as again our resident women's mixed martial arts expert, is a breakdown of this fight and some initial, some other thoughts that you have about this fantastic 8th Invicta event airing again on UFC Fight Pass.
All right, well, yeah, I mean, Waterson is #1 for a reason. I mean, you tap out Jessica Penn, who's just a beast on the ground, and you're going to impress anybody. You're right, though. She has more submissions than anything, and that's just a credit to her being a mixed martial artist, not just a karate fighter. And she started her martial arts career as a karate person, but she's evolved into something more than that, and she's become not only one of the best fighters in the world pound for pound, but she's going to become one of the most marketable fighters. You know, I hate to use this because it's true, and I've had conversations with certain people about this, but she's hot. There's no way to put it around it. She's a very, very attractive lady. So unfortunately, your demographic is, 18 to 35-year-old men, and they love watching hot chicks do stuff. So she's going to be a marketing piece, and from what I've been told from some people on the inside, right, they said that the UFC are going to look very, very close at the numbers here to see how much Waterson can draw. Now, I think it's Invicta as a whole that's going to be drawing, but Waterson is definitely at the top of the card, and they're going to probably give her more credit. So I'm not saying that you're going to see atomweights in the UFC at some point, but the UFC is going to look close at Waterson as a marketing tool. She, like I said, attractive and skilled, and that's all you need. The Rousey, I mean, obviously she can promote herself, but attractive and skilled.
Here's what Waterson brings to women's MMA that Ronda Rousey doesn't. She's a mom, and I think that's significant because you can say, "Hey, moms, this is a sport that people like you do." Let me ask you this: if Waterson is successful at her in her fight against Tamata, could you foresee her moving up to 115 in an effort to break into the UFC a little bit sooner?
If the money is right, totally. I'm actually surprised they didn't go after her to begin with, because I heard they went pretty hard after Jessica Penn to try out for the Ultimate Fighter 20, and she had just beaten her. So I read an article on MMA Junkie earlier this week that said Waterson put off her next pregnancy because of the UFC Fight Pass deal, and this is just such a big opportunity for her. Imagine an invitation to the UFC, how much of a bigger opportunity that would be for her, especially being marketable, a champion, and somebody that guys are going to root for. Again, she's an attractive lady. So, and I hate to always bring up the looks thing because I don't look at looks, I look at skill, but not everybody does. And that's just how the bottom line.
Talk about something that male MMA fighters don't have to worry about is putting off a pregnancy, right? Like if they want to have a kid, they or their wives or girlfriends can plan around that and they can still practice and compete and everything. But if you're a female MMA fighter and you want to have a kid, that's a year at least that you're out of the game probably. So, much credit is due to Waterson and to all of the different mothers who are also professional MMA fighters.
Right. Just look at the.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's hard enough just to be a professional anything and be a mom.
Right.
But to be a professional fighter and be a mom, I think takes a special brand of toughness. And I hope that we start to see more people who are mothers fighting in mixed martial arts, because I think that has the potential to draw in kind of an unexpected new audience.
Yeah, totally. And you use that it takes off a whole part of your career. The Ultimate Fighter 20 has Lisa Ellis, who's literally coming off a pregnancy. She hasn't had a fight since she was pregnant. She just got back in the gym, and just so happens that the Ultimate Fighter 20 came around, and that was her opportunity to get back in the cage. And because she's a respected veteran, because she has the resume, and because she's skilled, she got on the show despite not having a fight in almost 2 years. So.
Yeah, I think we'll obviously talk about the upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter as it draws closer, probably next week, right?
Next week, yep.
But, for now, Riley, why don't you break down maybe the top few fights on the Invicta 8 card? Let us know who you think's going to win and who's going to perform most impressively.
Sure. I'll give you my quick picks for the prelims without giving you any in-depth. If you want to see the in-depth, I'll plug it again, bleachreport.com. I put the predictions out today.
Boom.
The first fight is Delaney Owen versus J.J. Aldrich. I'm going to take Owen by submission. The next bout is Jody Escobar versus Jin Frey. I'm going to take the upset there and go for Jin Frey. Watch her YouTube knockout of Darla Harris. It is absolutely devastating. The next bout is Ashley Cummins versus Alexa Grasso. If you didn't know this, Cummins is a St. Louis police officer that was caught up in that whole Ferguson deal in the past few weeks, so we don't know where her head is at or how much she's been training. I'm going to go with Alexa Grasso there. Lightweight fight, first ever lightweight fight in Invicta. I will take Veronica Rothenhausler over Charmaine Tweet. The next fight is in the bantamweight division. It is Peggy Morgan versus Irene Aldana. I will take the newcomer from Mexico, Irene Aldana, by knockout.
Peggy Morgan's still fighting at bantamweight, huh? I guess I expected her to move up to featherweight after the Ultimate Fighter.
You know what? I think she's going to try and make another run at the UFC, so I think that's why she's going to stay there. But she's a huge bantamweight at 6'1", so she's got a lot of physical advantages.
She was strong as hell on Ultimate Fighter, I remember.
Yeah, she was. Then we get to the top 5 fights. I'll preview the co-main event and the one under it, and I'll just tell you the quick picks for the next 2 fights.
Yeah.
Rubber match between Roxanne Modafferi and Tara La Rosa. I will take Tara La Rosa in possibly the fight of the night. If you saw their first 2 fights, they were awesome.
Can I interrupt you real quick? Sorry, Riley.
Absolutely.
Can I interrupt you real quick? I know Roxanne Modafferi has lost like 5 or 6 straight, but she's one of my favorite fighters just because she's a huge nerd. She's clearly a huge nerd, and I'm a huge nerd. So it's kind of I feel like she and I would have been friends as nerds in high school. So I always root for her. You know, obviously she's had a lot of setbacks in her career, especially recently. But you know, she's a pioneer in women's MMA, and she will always be one of my favorite fighters. Sorry to interrupt.
No doubt about it. No, you had no problem there. But I'm going to take La Rosa. I think that she has more size on Modafferi, and
I agree with that. I agree with that.
And her striking's got a lot better if you watch the Rin Nakai fight. The next fight is between flyweights Michelle Ould and Deanna Bennett. I will take Ould in a very, very close fight. I actually interviewed both of these ladies earlier this week. Check BleacherReport.com for another shameless plug. All right, we get to the top 2 fights that aren't the main event. The first one is a bantamweight bout between Ediane Gomes and Tanya Evinger. Evinger is a wrestler. She tried out for the Ultimate Fighter 18. She was eliminated before the round of the house. She lost to, I believe, was it Raquel Pennington? I think. She looked good in her last fight, though. She took on Sarah D'Alio, and she repeatedly took her down, held her down, and beat her up. So she looked very, very good, especially after moving back up to 135. But Ediane Gomes is an animal. She's dropping from featherweight. We'll see how the weight cut goes, but she's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. She's a physical brute. She's a large woman. And I'm going to take her by decision in this fight. I think that she can ward off Evinger's takedowns and maybe make some takedowns of her own and beat her up a little bit. The co-main event is a strawweight title fight for the vacant strawweight title that Carla Esparza left to go to the UFC. It is former XFC champion Stephanie Aging taking on Finland's Katja Kaukampa.
We'll give you
very good fight. What's that?
I said we'll give you that one.
Yeah, you know what? I don't speak Finnish, so I'm going to pronounce this. Dude, I got to pronounce names all day that I don't know how to say, so just give me a break. So I think Kankampa is very good. She's a submission fighter. Her first loss was to Joanne Calderwood, which is not, no shame in that. Joanne's just a buzzsaw. I think she has the advantage on the ground in this fight. Stephanie Aging was a former U.S. national boxer. She is very, very good with her hands, but she has been working diligently on her jiu-jitsu game. And if you saw her last fight in XFC, she actually choked out a girl who's in the Ultimate Fighter house right now, Angela Magana, with a beautiful triangle choke. So this is going to be a very, very close fight. I think if Aging's takedown defense is up to par, she's going to, keep Ken Kampa on the feet, and she's going to light her up with her hands. But I don't think she's going to finish her. I think it's going to be a decision, and I think Aging's going to be crowned the champion there and possibly get a call from the UFC. So there are my quick Invicta picks.
All right. Invicta, again, the 8th of their events comes to us on UFC Fight Pass. Check that out.
Yep.
So this ends all of our MMA-related content. So before we get to our last piece here, I want to once again plug combatpress.com. Check back on the site every day, multiple times if you want, because there's always great content from me, from Riley, from all of the great contributors at combatpress.com. So before we leave today, we're going to start what I think will be a regular segment here called the Wrestling Minute. I think that the overlap, if you make the Venn diagram between MMA fans and pro wrestling fans, I think that middle intersection part is bigger than a lot of MMA fans would like to admit. So with that in mind, let's take a minute to talk about pro wrestling. First, Riley.
Yes. I want to talk about Raw on Monday. I thought it was atrocious. I thought it was one of the worst shows of the year. How many times did they plug the main event? How many times did they waste time recapping something they recapped already? For God's sake, the shameless plugs of the $9.99 are just getting desperate. Up until the main event, they had one wrestling match that was worth watching, and that was that wasn't even that good of a match. It was was it Ziggler? It was Ziggler and who was he with?
The Miz.
Sheamus. No, Ziggler and Sheamus versus the Miz and Cesaro.
Oh yeah.
By the way, I love Damian Sandow's new character as the stunt double. I was in tears laughing the entire time. Every time they put the camera on him, I loved it.
Damian Sandow's the one of the guys, because I've been a pro wrestling fan for a while, but I kind of got out of it for a bit, and when it came to Hulu Plus, when they started airing episodes of Raw, like in mid 2012, is when I really got back into it. And Damian Sandow's character is one of the guys that really inspired me to get back into pro wrestling, because I love all of the violent ballet and improv that is wrestling, but I appreciate guys that approach the whole thing with an ironic kind of absurdity about it all, and Damian Sandow really does that better than anybody else right now.
No doubt about it. He works hard, man, and they screwed up his character. I think that he could have been a top heel, and the minute he died, and I know wrestling fans will probably get on me for saying this, was the night he lost to Cena with the Money in the Bank briefcase. I mean, how can you bury
Great match, but still.
It was an awesome match. But then, okay, if you're going to have him lose, at least follow it up with him doing something good. I mean, I can understand him losing to Cena. That's not a huge deal. But then, he's got to just start doing something significant afterwards. They put him on, a 5-month losing streak. It was like, oh, sweet, so you ruined this guy.
Yeah. But kind of like they're doing to Cesaro right now, right?
Oh, my God. Don't even get me started on that. Cesaro should be a top babyface right now. Not even a top guy, but a top mid-carder.
Yeah.
The fans were so into him after WrestleMania. The reactions he were getting were amazing. First off, the song they gave him. What the hell was that?
Perry Saturn knockoff.
No, I love the Tornado Sirens. I thought that was great, but the song afterwards, it sounded like a terrible acid trip rave. And then I was just like, what the hell? And then I like that they put him with Heyman, but he took second fiddle to Lesnar, so it really lessened his ability to get over. But getting back to Raw, the main event was good, but I'm sick of seeing the baby faces win every time. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't even leave any suspense anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, other than Rusev winning, I think the baby faces swept the card. I mean, jeez.
I've started watching Raw. I DVR it because I sometimes fall asleep before it's over. So, I end up watching a lot of it on fast forward because, there's a lot of stuff about it right now that intrigues me and that's fun, but this whole Bella stuff I don't care about at all. And
I forgot about that.
Yeah, pretty much anything to do with John Cena I'm not into. Really the only things that get me really excited now are Stardust, because I'm a big Cody Rhodes mark. And
I liked Cody Rhodes before he was Stardust. I thought he was starting to come onto his own, and then they put him in their gimmick. So
I think he's super weird. He's a super weird dude, and this just allows him to kind of explore this part of his personality. So
but he's never gonna outdo his brother in terms of creepiness, because he originated creepiness. Goldust was the guy. So I don't like it. I thought that instead of turning him to Stardust, it should have been a feud between Goldust and Cody Rhodes. I thought that would have been awesome.
I feel like that's inevitable anyway.
But that was the perfect time to do it, I thought.
They can have that in their back pocket, though, they can pull it out when they really don't have anything else to do. And then he can, go morph back to Cody. Or maybe he'll stay Stardust, and Goldust will turn back Dustin Rhodes. That would be funny.
Yeah.
So, Raw, a fairly big disappointment. What about Night of Champions on September 20th are you looking forward to, if anything, Riley?
Oh, God. I don't even remember what's on the card yet. Lesnar versus Cena, I mean, the SummerSlam match was cool because, you never seen a Cena match like that. But, I mean, I want to see Lesnar fight somebody else. We've seen him fight Cena, twice or 3 times now. It's just okay. I want Cena out of the main event picture. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
The WWE needs to make somebody else. They're so adamant about having one guy. The Attitude Era wasn't one guy. That's why it was so successful. It was Austin, it was Rock, it was Foley, it was Taker, it was all those guys. That's why it's the most successful era in pro wrestling. Not because there was one guy. There wasn't just the Hulk Hogan or there wasn't just the John Cena. Put somebody else in the main event, for God's sake. I don't even remember the other matches. I think what else was there? The women's match, unless it's Paige versus AJ straight up, I could care less because the Bellas are awful at wrestling. Natalia's good at wrestling. I thought they were going to include her in a 3-way match, but that's not going to happen now. And go back to Raw. Christ Almighty, the 6 women divas, whatever the hell it was, match was so. There was more botches than I could count on like my hands and toes.
There's 2 separate women's divisions now. There's the Divas division and then the Total Divas division.
Oh my God, the show just needs to go away. And so to have the only women they should keep on the roster that are on the main roster right now are Paige, AJ, and Natalia. And Naomi is fine too because she's at least athletic. Get rid of the rest of them. They're all bad.
I like Alicia Fox. I like Alicia Fox.
Okay, no, I'll agree with you there. And then Emma too, but they don't use her, so who cares?
I'm looking forward to seeing who they bring up because it seems like they're trying to develop the Divas division into something that can be a draw on its own. And I'm hoping that the moves that they make in NXT will reflect that because AJ's a real wrestler, Paige is a real wrestler. They're not these women who just happened upon professional wrestling. Like that's what they wanted to do. And I know that there's other people like that who grew up in the Attitude Era like you and I did. So there's got to be a lot of women like that in NXT, and so I look for, and it's obvious that they trust those women more than the others because they've had the belt on either Paige or AJ for who knows how long, and those are really the only 2 besides Natalia true wrestlers in the Divas division. We've taken way more than a wrestling minute here, but Riley, final take on Raw this Monday.
It was just awful. I mean, like I said, there were 2 useful wrestling matches. Other than that, it was either squash jobs or crap wrestling. So, I mean, I just thought it was a terrible episode. And I might be a little cranky because Dean Ambrose isn't around, and that's my guy right now. So, I love Rollins too, but Ambrose is my guy right now.
I hope he does really well at this movie and then, becomes an actor. Like a dramatic actor.
Could be. Yeah,
he could, he could. And then he doesn't have to destroy his body. I love to see him wrestle, but it'd be cool to see him as a dramatic actor.
But like you said, he's a wrestling guy, so
that's true.
I don't think he would do that. So.
Well, if the money's right, I think he could be convinced. You're gonna pay me more to not throw my fucking self, throw myself around R-rated, throw myself around a ring and get curb stomped fake on some cinder blocks, but still cut myself open. I think he could be convinced.
Yeah.
So my take, real quick, I'm gonna go a little bit, wrestling subculture here. If you ever get the chance to see a Ring of Honor show, definitely go. They come to Milwaukee about twice a year. They come to Chicago Ridge twice a year as well.
Yeah, you know what? I think they're coming soon, and I just have nobody to go with. So
I'd go by myself, to be honest with you, if I couldn't find people to go with, because Ring of Honor is just a fantastic thing. But here's the one thing about Ring of Honor that I'd like them to change. There's something called, and I'm probably not getting the term correctly here, but I'm going to call it brand poisoning. When a certain brand just inherits kind of a really negative connotation and they need to change. Like Philip Morris changed their name back in the 90s when they were getting sued by all these ex-smokers. And, like Blackwater changed their name like 5 or 6 times after all the bad publicity that they got during the Iraq War invasion in 2003 and 4. And I think that Ring of Honor should consider doing the same thing with the tag team currently known as War Machine. Wow. Obviously, for MMA fans, that name brings up certain extremely negative connotations. Not only just as a fan of MMA, but as a fan of humanity, generally speaking. I think we can all agree that the things that War Machine, the fighter, is alleged to have done are pretty despicable. And with that, I think the phrase War Machine, even if it was originated, with the Marvel comic, the Iron Man sidekick dude, I think that the name has been sullied to a point where Ring of Honor could afford to change the War Machine tag team nickname to something else, because then they don't have to tweet out so-and-so fights War Machine and have MMA fans be like, wait a minute, what? I realize it's a picky point, but nevertheless, I think War Machine, the fighter, has done enough to ruin that name where Ring of Honor should consider just divorcing themselves from it entirely, even if it has nothing to do with the fighter himself. That's my wrestling minute.
It's like the name Adolf.
Yeah, exactly. Especially here in America.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has been the midweek report from CombatPress.com. I think we've got a great weekend of fights coming up here, whether you're just going to watch the UFC or you're going to tune into the UFC, Bellator, and Invicta all at the same time and then have your brain explode from so much MMA. I think we've got a fantastic weekend ahead of us, and to come off, frankly, a pretty surprisingly successful probably not in terms of buy rate, but in terms of overall fight quality, a pretty successful UFC 177. So, a pretty great time to be fans of MMA right here in early September. Riley, any final thoughts about this weekend at the fights?
I probably will not be leaving my house. Thanks a lot, MMA.
Ain't that how it always should be? Check out all the great content once again at combatpress.com. We will be back next Wednesday, 9:30 in the East, 6:30 in the West, for the next Wednesday midweek report, where we will review several of the fights that we discussed and previewed this evening, along with what I'm sure will be an extended Wrestling Minute segment once again, and probably much more. Riley, thanks so much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate your insight. You have like an encyclopedic knowledge of MMA fights, and the ability that you have to recall certain events in your analysis is pretty impressive. So thank you very much for being a part of this.
Hey, thanks a lot, man. That's why they call me the Rain Man of MMA.
Definitely good at remembering fight results. All right, hey, I'm Eric Reinert. Follow me on Twitter at ReinertEric. Follow Riley on Twitter at, I'm going to flash him on the screen one time here for all of you folks who are watching. Big Riles MMA, follow it right there. And follow everybody at Combat Press at Combat Press. For Riley Kontek, I'm Eric. Oh, go ahead.
By the way, once I hit 1 million followers, we're having a giveaway. So get on that.
We will be giving away 1 million of something when Riley gets 1 million followers, and we'll follow up with you on that when that milestone is reached. Until that time, check out combatpress.com every day for all the latest MMA news, interviews, and opinions. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us tonight on the Combat Press Midweek Report. I'm Eric Reinert. For Riley Kontek, enjoy the fights this weekend.